It is my good fortune today to welcome Peter Walker to the studio, and he's agreed to come in and talk about his work, which is now hanging at Gallery 825 on La Cienega and about Santa Monica Boulevard in Hollywood. I got to say right off the bat, you have to go see this work in person. So much of the effect of the work is dependent on the scale of these drawings, and it really is impressive to see the work. So make sure you catch the show before it comes down in a month, and we'll get to dates in just a second. But let me introduce first the one and the only,
Greetings.
Peter Walker.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. It's always fun to come and talk about art.
Yes, indeed. Well, tell us what the dates are, where it is, etc., etc.
Yeah, so the show is at Gallery 825, like you said, which is 825 La Cienega, which is just about 100 yards south of Santa Monica Boulevard. The dates are the 27th of June through July 24th. And I believe the hours of the gallery are 10 to 5, and Monday is closed. So plenty of opportunity to get there and see it.
I was at the opening of the show this past Saturday, which was very well attended. Having already seen the work and knowing well what I was getting myself into, I still was impressed walking into that gallery and feeling like the presentation was excellent. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of that process of putting it up and how you felt about the end result?
Yeah, so the curation of the show actually happened long before the actual setting up of the show. I had did a little to scale model in Photoshop of the space, and then I imported images and did a digital curation of the show long before I ever went there. Went to talk with the gallery director, got some feedback, and so once the day for putting up the show came, I mean, it was really a painless process. We brought the pieces in, put them exactly where I anticipated them going. We moved one or two pieces just based on how we felt like they communicated there in the site. But by and large, it was a really painless process putting it up, and I couldn't have been more pleased. It's a great space.
It's really quite fortunate. I mean, for me, my experience anyway, setting up shows is that quite a bit changes about how I feel about the work once it's in the space and seeing the work together, and seeing how it interacts with the space itself and the lighting and all sorts of different factors.
Yeah, like you said, sometimes you get to a space and you want to change it based on location, based on lighting, but the space had some very specific sizes of walls which lent itself to certain pieces. So some of the decisions were made for me. Other decisions were made kind of there. Like I said, we moved a couple pieces, but for the most part, yeah, it was a really easy install.
Pretty much the first thing that you'd see walking in the door of the gallery is that big spiky hair drawing.
Yeah.
And it's life size, and a fairly intimidating figure, as it were. And I think kind of sets the tone for the rest of your show to a certain degree. Would you say that, or what were your thoughts in terms of how people would first encounter your work?
So that was one of the last minute changes. I initially had a different piece that was there that was kind of the eye-grabbing piece, and it was suggested that we switch it for the spiky hair guy, which was great. I mean, it really does kind of set a tone. It like you said, with the scale of the piece, the direct, the way in which the figure kind of directly engages the audience, it's I would think a little inviting, to come in.
Well, I mean that the figure itself has a lot of character. It's a very interesting image, but also just the scale. You're immediately, and I think that's why I was glad to see that one, only because it was one of the full scale drawings, and I feel like that, to me, that sense of scale, that sense of a bodily relationship, and this very visceral reaction that you have to something that is life size, is some of what's most compelling, I think, about the drawings.
Well, and I think the scale. I mean, you see a lot of paintings this size, and to me, the drawings feel even larger than they actually are because they are pencil drawings. And pencil usually is a little bit more intimate and smaller, but these are life-size pencil drawings. And so I think by virtue of the medium, they feel a little bit more monumental than they otherwise would be if they were, say, paintings. And I think that kind of plays into it. So yeah, I mean, the scale and the medium really, I think, demands kind of attention.
Right. Give us a summary of what the work's about.
So the work is about our fragmented interaction with others in a metropolitan area. So much of our interactions are temporary, transient, fleeting, here today, gone tomorrow, or even here in a moment, gone in the next moment. I wanted to capture that fleeting and make it concrete, make it permanent, to remember the moment instead of letting it just fly by. And so I looked for situations where I could capture a collection of people and kind of immortalize their very superficial interaction. But beyond that, I also just wanted to kind of capture the LA experience. I wanted to capture images or interactions that could be readily interpreted as LA. Hopefully, though, even though that was kind of the intention to capture the LA, hopefully they are universal enough that people can relate to them regardless of where they are.
So universal in that they're kind of an urban experience.
An urban experience, yeah.
And one of the things that I found most compelling about the drawings, being from LA, is that I was immediately able to pick out where they were taken. Right. That having been to Venice, I'm familiar with the types of people there, and maybe I'm even familiar with some of the people in the actual photographs that you drew from. But it struck me that by the character of what they were wearing and even their proximity to each other, like this mix of people and how close they were together, the types of expressions and body language that was present in the image, told me immediately where these pictures were taken. And it struck me that these were kind of a portrait of those locations, right? Via these specific kinds of social interactions that were facilitated by that very unique space or place. So
one thing that I've always done, regardless of the medium or regardless of the time, I've always done landscape, actually. I've used landscape as a lens to interpret where I am. And so one of the things I really wanted to do was figure out how to interpret the LA experience through landscape. And I found that very difficult because I found the landscape very disjointed and there was no clear center, there was nothing that was kind of tying everything together. And the more I thought about it, the more I interpreted LA landscape by the people and not by the actual landscape, which is why all of these quote-unquote landscapes are rendered with the complete exclusion of landscape, with the complete exclusion of context. And so it's just about the people and the interactions, it's the people and the associations, and everything else is negated. And yet, hopefully I'm still communicating place, and hopefully I'm still communicating time, which is what landscape does. But I tried to kind of find a way to communicate landscape while deleting or negating all aspects of context or landscape. So. And to me, it just was wholly not interesting to try and represent LA landscape with strip malls and palm trees. I mean, that's so cliche. It wasn't interesting, and to me, it didn't really hit at the heart of what LA was or is.
As opposed to somewhere like Chicago or New York, where the architecture is very much
absolutely,
a part of the city
or
identity.
San Francisco, the topography, the bay and the sights and the smells. There's certain places have very identifiable kind of markers that indicate place, and LA just in many ways doesn't have that, for me at least.
So to a certain degree, there is universal experience to be had there, and something that maybe all city dwellers could to identify with, but there is something very LA centric,
At least that's what initially when I started this body of work, that was the intention, and it became less specific and more generalized. But yes, the impetus was to capture LA and to capture LA landscape, and it just so happened that it was the negation of the land that really kind of spoke to me about LA. Because it's in many ways it's hard to find a natural Angelino. I mean, this city is so much about.
I love that as a movie title, by the way. Natural Angelino.
Natural Angelino.
Something about the sound, anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, so many of the people here are transient. They come, they go. They're not natural born here. They come and spend some time, they leave. And even if you are here long term, it's very rare to find multi-generational Angelinos. And so it is a very changeable place. And so, again, the associations that I wanted to capture had to kind of signify that temporary, that fleeting, here today, gone tomorrow. That to me is really the LA experience. And that's probably, ironically, what binds people together. It's that feeling of not being bound together in some ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. So talk a little bit about the evolution of the work. There are some fairly significant changes that happen looking at the older work as it compares to the most recent drawings. How would you describe that evolution?
Yeah, so I started with the portraits, which were an excellent starting point, but I would say maybe the most conceptually weak. They were a great place to start. Again, I wanted to kind of capture the people of the periphery, people that I walked past but never really thought much about. Everything about this person was completely a mystery to me except how they presented themselves. Their clothes, their affect, their posture. And so that's where the deletion of the environment came in. There was no context to these people. It was just how they decided to brand themselves with clothing or posture. And so that's kind of how I started. I just wanted to capture these people in a moment, exactly in the moment that I saw them. But it eventually led into these landscapes where there was still the deletion of the land, there was still the deletion of context. It was still about the associations and the temporariness. And so those early pieces were snapshots. I was going around looking for moments to capture, and then I would represent them with as much fidelity as I possibly could because that moment was important to me. That moment where everybody shared at least a time together, that was what is important. So you'll even find evidences of deletion, like if there was a tree, someone is cut in half, like they're peeking through the tree, or their head is coming up over a ridge. I wanted those kind of those fragments of people to be included so that it was still recognizable as landscape, and it would require the viewer to kind of insert themselves to fill in the gaps so that they had to in some way participate in this collective experience. And so again, it was really important for me to keep that fidelity to moment together. But eventually I kind of drifted away from that. I started to do fabricated interactions. But again, any kind of interaction still had to include people that were there at the same time in the same moment. I might manipulate them to move them and to communicate something that I wanted to communicate or to evoke a certain emotion that I want to evoke. But it went from fidelity to moment to fidelity of time, but not necessarily of narrative. And they became a little bit more manipulated, a little bit more nuanced, and eventually I completely manipulated and went from people sharing a context to people sharing space, literally space. And that's where the pieces that are a hybrid of different people kind of came in. It's almost like they're the people from the land of misfit toys, 3 arms, 5 arms, 2 faces, sometimes disjointed, sometimes blended into each other. But I wanted to go from, it was basically a similar solution to, a different solution to a similar problem. Again, people sharing context, people sharing space. It was just a different solution to the same problem.
And would you say ultimately a better solution or just different?
Different solution, and I guess it's a matter of personal preference, aesthetically, which one you like. What was interesting about the show is I would have people come up and express which pieces they felt like were the strongest or which pieces they thought they responded to the most, and it was a mixed bag. Some people really liked the presence of the portrait. Some people really liked the kind of the implied narrative of the interactions, and some people really liked the quirkiness of the hybrid people. And so I thought in that way it was a successful show. I know we talked about this a month or two ago when I was getting your opinion about what to include in the show, and I didn't know if I should include all of these different parts of the portfolio, and your opinion was that they all kind of communicate something to a greater whole. So yeah, I decided to include them all, and I think the show was better for it. I think it was stronger for it.
For sure. Yeah, you do get that sense of evolution and progression of ideas.
Yeah.
Right? Or like maybe not a complete thought, because I don't think the thought's complete yet per
Right.
se, but it is there is a sense of a process there. The thing that struck me going to the show and seeing the work up next to each other is that the craft is undeniable, right? Like they're just cool to look at. They're big drawings period, right? It's wonderful to see just that material. And also, we all know pencil. We know what that means. We know the size of the drawing implement. We know how it relates to paper. Like, everybody has handled a pencil, right?
It's a universal language of material.
So there is this kind of relatability just because of the material. And so that relatability, I think, makes it more accessible to everybody just in terms of appreciating the craft, appreciating how big these things are, right?
Yeah.
And also, makes it somewhat relatable in that we've all tried to draw, so people can understand how technically adept they are, right? So I think it's nice to have that accessibility, and it's nice to appreciate them just on that level of like, wow, these are kind of cool, and like I said, the scale is really quite wonderful to experience. But for me, and this is something I've said to you before, is that the first ones, just the life size figures, they don't really go beyond that, like cool craft, well rendered, but portrait. I'm not. Yeah, there's something about not having the context there that says something or implies something, but really I don't get past just a cool person to look at. Whereas, and then you get to the ones where there's multiple people, and then you start to get into some kind of implied narrative or relationship between the people, a suggestion of what context they might be occupying, stuff like that. I don't really, with the groups of people, necessarily get the sense that they're a combination of multiple images. I don't think there's enough information there for me to be able to pull that from it. I mean, some of them feel a bit too crowded, and some of them do feel a little disjointed, like you got multiple perspectives happening. So maybe in that sense, but in the final pieces, that combining of multiple images into single figures, it is the quirkiness. I mean, there is something undeniable, and it's a personal preference too, right? I kind of dig them just because they're a little weird, right? They're, but in terms of taking the craft and scale, and then this idea of portraiture, and then there's that, and then. There's that additional step that I think kind of makes it, goes beyond just portraiture, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, for me, anyway.
So I think if there was a show of only the portraits, it would probably be a weak show. But I liked including one or two of the portraits with the other pieces because I thought it added something, another element that was not had in the other pieces. In the other pieces, the viewer acts mainly as a voyeur. They're not engaged in any way with any of the figures in the implied narrative. And so it's almost like an outsider looking in, whereas the portraits are the only pieces that directly engage the viewer. It's the only one that requires a relationship with the viewer. Right. And they were the only pieces that were singular opposed to a collective. And so really I wanted to explore kind of this individual collectiveness or this, this notion of how do we be a isolated set of islands. We're all together, but we're all isolated. And so they're the only pieces that really highlight that isolation. The other ones do kind of communicate that isolation, but it's a little bit more subtle. This one was a little bit more direct. So it injected something into conversation that I felt like was necessary. But if you look at them in isolation, you're right. There's something missing. There's not quite that complexity to it. But hopefully, when you take it all in totality, all of the pieces collectively, then they start to make a little bit more sense, and there's a little bit of nuance.
Absolutely, and yeah, I'm not trying to imply in any way that those shouldn't be there, or that they were any worse per se. But I do think, well, you know, now just talking about that, it's interesting to me to think of it as these different periods of this thought, or these different types of drawing serving a different function in that the totality of the show, right?
Yeah.
That maybe those first drawings that are just more straightforward portraits are almost like the gatekeepers, like they kind of let us into that mental space,
Yeah.
and then we're kind of walked through these different iterations.
They're the splash point.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So it kind of serves as an entrance point. And besides that, there's just nothing wrong with having just a cool drawing.
And
right?
they're pretty cool drawings.
But yeah, it's like they're pretty cool. But I do like it. You know, I think art is at its best when it's not just representation, when it's not just documentation of coolness, but you know, it tweaks your noodle a little bit and gets you thinking. And that's I felt the noodle tweaking happening most with those final drawings.
The final drawings.
And you know, now that we're having this conversation, maybe the reason I was able to feel that more acutely is because there was that contrast of the first drawings being there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, anyway, that's even better on you. I think, you know, well done. Anyway, you've been more than generous with your time, so I appreciate you taking this hour or so to come and talk about your work. I want to recommend again highly that you go and actually go to Gallery 825 before. What's the date?
June 24th.
Before June 24th.
July 24th.
July 24th. It would be hard to get to there before June 24th.
Yes, exactly.
Before July 24th. And you know, go in and actually stand with this work, take some time, because it really is wonderful to see this stuff in person. So we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks.